Welcome to the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
It's a new week and we have new panelists. We are pleased to welcome back two partisans, Will Davis, former research director with the Minnesota DFL, and Anna Mathews, current executive director with the Minnesota Republican Party. We are going to start with a quick recap of our first live in-person podcast at the MinPost Festival over the weekend. We will then bring things back to Minnesota for some conversations on what is going on at in the legislative races for control of the Minnesota House. We will break down the status of one of Minnesota's most competitive battleground seats in the country, Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District. And we will end by getting our guest thoughts on tonight's vice presidential debate between Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show. So, Michael, we had our first in-person podcast episode this weekend at the MinPost Festival. Your take?
It was fantastic. It went super fast. My great appreciation to MinPost, to John Rouleau, former Senator Michelle Benson, and for you for making it possible. It went really fast, and it was a lot of fun. A lot of good conversations, and gave us some food for thought for some future episodes where we can go through some of those questions.
Absolutely. We talked about the status of the Republican Party in Minnesota and where we go from here to hopefully get back to winning some statewide races in the future. We had a lot of questions from the audience we were not able to get to, and some further conversation about the future. And so further episode, we'll come back and hit on some of that. But it was a great event, and another shout out to MinPost for the invite.
Very appreciative of MinPost for the invite. And as I said on Saturday, a good I'm very proud of you and I, Becky, for creating the type of space where people want to have us come and do things. It was a lot of fun. So thanks again.
And especially having an audience that, welcomes conversation too. We had a receptive audience. I don't think was necessarily filled with all Republicans by any means, but willing to sit there and have a conversation about and listen to our conversation about our perspectives on where the party is and where we can go. And it was a warm reception. We're grateful for everybody who showed up, and hopefully have some new listeners on the show here today.
Absolutely. This is a great episode to follow up with, because Anna and Will really throw the heat.
I am excited. So we are going to kick things off. As everybody hopefully knows, there are 134 seats up for grabs in Minnesota. The current breakdown of the Minnesota House, there was 70 Democrats, 64 Republicans, and the Democrats trifecta, the single party rule up at the Capitol, kind of hangs in the balance. Will, I want to start with you. How are Democrats feeling about it as we're heading in, less than 40 days away from the election?
I think the DFL is feeling pretty confident right now. I think a lot of these races are starting to shape up exactly as we had hoped. I think our field game is, I would say, dominating right now. They're so strong. We're out knocking doors. We are struggling to handle all the volunteer signups right now, to be quite honest with you.
Humble brag.
Yeah,
Humble brag,
no big deal. But we, I think a lot of these races are looking good. I think the quality of candidates is a very stark difference. We've all seen the articles recently. There's very little comparison when it comes to not only expertise on issues, but just quality of people as well. So I think the House is good. It feels really good right now, actually. And I think we're going to hold the trifecta.
Anna, this is your first year or first election cycle being executive director over at the party. Talk to us about what the party's been doing, how your volunteer base is looking, and what you're hearing and seeing on the ground with your candidates.
Well, I don't want to copy exactly what Will said, but I feel that the volunteers are coming in droves, honestly. I mean, even I'm at the office today. We have people in and out constantly all day, every day. We've had to hire additional people just to handle it. The Trump campaign as well, they recruited like 1,400 volunteers in the first, 6 weeks that they were on the ground, which, again, I don't know the stats on what the DFL is doing, but, we're really, really happy with that number. And then obviously that trickles down, right? Because every door that you knock, every voter that you turn out, if they're voting Republican, the hope is that they vote all the way down the ticket or all the way up the ticket. But I think the most encouraging thing that we've seen recently is the polling. The Strib put out that poll just last week, and I'll just, the question that they asked about the Minnesota House. They said, who would you prefer to win back the Minnesota House? And it was overwhelmingly outside of Hennepin and Ramsey County, the answer was overwhelmingly Republicans. And when they looked at independents' answer to that question, it was even more overwhelmingly Republicans. And so I know that the DFL has a machine. I know that we are fighting an uphill battle to take back the House, but I'm actually feeling really good about it. And again, not only because of the polling, but that was a really great poll to see last week.
Will, this is the poll. We've talked about the different numbers, what it looks like at the presidential level and the Senate and different issue areas. But it does, independents did lean overwhelmingly towards Republicans. What is your take on how those polls look, and also the fact of the matter that for Democrats to pick up seats, they probably do need to lean a little bit outside of the Twin Cities, whereas the Republicans probably need to pick up a couple of those suburban seats. And what's your thought on all of that?
Sure. Well, I would love to go back before every cycle and do a late September, early October side-by-side comparison to some of these polls. Democrats withhold support until it's election day, until it's time to go to the ballot. I mean, we've seen this. They have expectations for what our candidates are going to do and say and promise. And these polls never accurately reflect. I mean, I think they're always like relatively close, but I think what the one piece that is always underestimated is Dems withholding votes. And I know you mentioned Hennepin County and Ramsey County, but even within there, I think the support is even stronger as well. But I think that same thing goes out to the suburbs, that Dems withhold support until it's election day and they see who's on the ballot, and it's an easy check for them. And I think we always outperform those every cycle. I predicted the trifecta last cycle, actually, when we were polling behind in the Senate races as well. I just had a feeling, and I really feel that way again this time.
Michael, when we were discussing the same poll and the Harris Walz Trump Vance numbers, we thought that it was maybe reflecting a closer spread than what it actually was. What's your thoughts when we look at it on the inverse here with the legislative races?
I think Republicans need the race for president to be under 10 and as close to as 5 as possible. And then I think it's a ground game. The question is all comes down to candidate recruitment in some of these races. I think this is an interesting thing, and I'd be curious to get I'd like to get Anna and Becky's take, just because they're Republicans, on something. I think that Walz being picked as a running mate of Harris energizes Republicans in the state. Plus, coupled with Trump, I know it's not a redo of the 2022 governor's race, because I think there was some apathy with the Republican nominee Jensen, but I do think that Republicans are energized. And so I think in that sense, I think it's really giving Republicans, I think, some energy in this cycle. Now, Democrats are energized too, so both sides are energized. And I think that's an interesting dynamic that we're going to see. I think it's going to be a real foot race this election cycle. But my initial thought, and I'm going to point out where I think I was wrong, my initial thought was, when Walz was picked, that would take Minnesota truly off the map. Now, not for the presidential race, because I think Democrats are going to win the state of Minnesota, but on the legislative race, I thought it could have some real down ballot implications, meaning thought it could maybe smother some Republican enthusiasm. I think it's possible that I was wrong. And so we'll see on election day, but I'm curious what others think about Walz being on the ticket. What does that do for Republicans down ballot? Not just Democrats, because we know they're energized, but what does Walz being on the ticket do for down ballot Republicans?
Well, before we get to Anna, because I know she's going to have some good insights on this, because she's living and breathing it every day. But my perspective on it is that it's kind of like you. I was a little surprised of what the polls have shown since Walz was the pick. I do think, Minnesotans are notorious for liking to flip-flop back and forth across that ballot. And this is a place where I think it could really benefit down ballot, because I do think that with Walz having such a platform to remind voters in Minnesota, and obviously across the country, but here in Minnesota, what he did and some of those progressive accolades that he stands behind, and especially what was done when it was the single party rule up at the Capitol. I think that Republican or Minnesota voters are going to want a little bit of balance when it comes to the legislative races that they're voting for here at the House. I do, if the election is tomorrow, I think Republicans do take back majority of the House. But I do also think that Harris and Walz come out on top here in Minnesota. Anna, I know that you talk to your volunteers, you're getting real-time feedback from the doors. Obviously, we do know that Democrats, like Will said, are certainly energized by their governor, their guy being in such a prominent place in the country. What are you hearing from voters at the doors?
Well, typically governors don't really have a midterm, right? But we almost have a midterm here with Walz. And as you know, midterms tend to kind of swing the opposite way.
Good point.
And so I think that there are a lot of people, and I'll just start with Republicans, I guess. I've heard from a lot of Republicans who, frankly, did not know everything about Walz. Like, obviously, we all work in politics. We kind of know everything, whether we classify it as good, bad, or ugly, right? But I have heard from a lot of people who've said, I didn't know this about Walz. I didn't know that about him, rada, et cetera. And I think that the media, the local media, has not done a good job of covering him and of covering, Flanagan and DFL legislators in general. And it's been really interesting to watch the national media blow up some of those things that Republicans classify as the bad and the ugly, right? And so we've been hearing from a lot of people who are maybe softer Republicans or even, slightly independent, who are realizing how bad Walz is now that he's getting this coverage. But then also too, people on the very, very far left, like you said, Michael, I do think that they're energized. I'm not going to argue with that. But then people on the far right, like the hardcore, staunch Republicans, they are realizing that they have a chance to redo the election in 2022.
Like Becky.
Sense, right? Like there's a chance to redo him. Yes, haha, poor Becky. To hopefully beat him this time. And I guess, Will, I'm curious to your perspective on the polling numbers. I know, Becky, you mentioned that, but obviously my Republican perspective is that Kamala is terrible and no one likes her and no one likes Walz, and that's why the numbers are dropping. But I mean, there's a 3-point lead for her in Minnesota right now, and I have to attribute some of that to Walz. I can't not, right? Like it at least needs to be explored.
I mean, I remember at this time, Scott Jensen had some kind of lead in one of the polls in 22. And I will say this.
Oh my
also,
goodness, he did. That's right.
If 2022 was not a referendum on Tim Walz when he was literally on the ballot, then what was it? I mean, maybe people didn't like Scott Jensen, but if they so hate Tim Walz, then why did he win without he would have won both the times he was elected in Minnesota. He would have won the state without a single vote for him coming out of Minneapolis, St. Paul. That's how well he did in the suburbs and greater Minnesota. So he didn't need those votes. And by the way, those votes are an amazing blue firewall for us as well. And the idea that folks in the suburbs don't like Tim Walz that they'll go vote for Donald Trump, there is literally no precedence for that to be possible. Trump has lost. He's got his butt kicked here twice, and he did not gain a vote in 2020 over 2016. So I don't think his popularity is going to help much at all. And that's who you're expecting them to go if they don't like Tim Walz. I find it just beyond belief.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
Well, so here's one other thing, and how this trickles down to the legislative races. Now, a couple articles have come out about the Trump campaign and kind of how they're operating in these different states. It is my understanding, based on the scripts that were published, that they're not IDing. The Trump campaign is not asking their volunteers to ID for down ballot candidates. So not only are they not IDing for Royce White, but nobody in the legislature either. It was a purely Trump JD Vance questions across the board. And so that has to affect the trickle down in some capacity. Because I know we are out IDing for local, Amy Klobuchar, of course, but also all of our House candidates. And in the case of SD45, our Senate candidate. So if they're not even reciting at the doors when they're talking to other Republicans, the names of the local legislators or candidates, how is that trickle down going to actually help? I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that, but
I mean, I would argue though, if you're going to go to if a voter is going to go and cast their ballot for Donald Trump, they're going to cast ours down the ballot. I don't think it works the other way up. I don't necessarily believe that a candidate or a voter going to vote for Wayne Johnson in 41 is necessarily going to go up and vote for Trump. But I don't think it works. I think it works one way and not the other. So my thought is, if someone's going to go and say, yes, I'm voting for Donald Trump, I'm voting ours down the ballot.
What about independents, though?
The other thing that we have to think about too, though, is just turnout, right? Like turnout matters a lot in elections. And the other thing too, I am going to push back on you a little bit, Will, because different years can bring totally different things with them, right? I think one of the craziest things that just blew my mind. So I worked in Kansas for a cycle. Okay. So not Minnesota, whatever, but I'm sure that you're all familiar with Chris Kobach, who's kind of like a national fire thrower, right? He got more votes than the governor in 2022, and he had gotten fewer votes than her 4 years ago. I mean, that was a total 180. And so timing really does have a lot to do with political stuff. But back to the turnout piece, there were a lot of Republicans who did not vote in 2022, and there's nobody to blame for that except for the Republican Party and the executive director of the Republican Party, right? But Trump does drive turnout, and I think that when people are energized, when there is somebody at the top of the ticket like Donald Trump, when his campaign is making investments in the state to capitalize on that, that will help us. CD2, I know this is later on the agenda, Becky, but if you don't mind me jumping to it now, Jason Lewis won with Trump on the ticket in 2016. Tyler Kistner came very, very close in 2020. So I do believe that the Trump bump is a real thing. And I do believe that he does help with turnout. And I think that that cannot be ignored, regardless of what else is going on at the same time.
That's totally true. I would say he helps us with our turnout as well. I mean,
yes,
people show up to vote, not let Donald Trump become president in Minnesota. A lot of DFL people were fired up about that. So,
well, and I think to Michael's point, we're going to be seeing that with Walz, right? Because, you know, Republicans, they dislike Walz a lot more than they dislike Joe Biden. So it will be interesting. I did feel after Biden stepped down, everybody just got more energized. Like it's palpable. You can feel it. So it'll be interesting.
I will say this on one point, looking at the 2022 race, and Will, you and I have to kind of discuss this a bit offline. My perspective is that Jensen's message again, and first of all, let me just close. I say this as someone who is proudly supporting Harrison Walz this election cycle. And so I'm trying to offer my analysis be as fair as I can and just kind of maybe offer perspective on 22. I think Jensen's messaging in 2022 cratered and smothered so much Republican enthusiasm. I think his messaging was so off. His messaging was so bonkers that he never was taken credibly amongst a number of Republicans. I think although I disagree with the message, and I'm certainly not going to spend time trying to tell Republicans how to message against Harrison Walz, the message has been a little bit more refined, and I think you're getting more of a little bit more of a polished message. And so I think it gives Republicans a second chance to have some energy. They're not manifesting their vote. Their manifestation of their vote is not a vote for Scott Jensen. It's a vote for Trump. And I think that I'm going to be very curious of the numbers. I think it's unsettled science, but I'm very curious as to what's going to happen.
I will say the top of the Minnesota ticket this time around, despite him not being referenced by Minnesota Republicans ever, is Royce White, who certainly does not have a focused campaign message as well. So I don't know. That race should be helpful in turnout, and I think it's going to tank it, if anything. I mean, who's fired up to vote? I mean, he's terrible. He's awful, and that's why he's not even acknowledged ever.
He is.
He's kind of like Voldemort. He's kind of like Voldemort on this show. We kind of don't mention him, but
you mention him all the time, Michael. And the party does. We do work with him. We do mention him. I mean, it's been on social media. I don't know why the Democrats keep on pushing that. It's kind of like the Tory Van Oot article, but I don't know where it's coming from. But whatever.
I make no apologies for Tory. I can tell you that much.
Well, you're not Tory, so you don't have to. But
hey, I love Tory, so I'm going to give her a shout out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have thoughts about that article as well. You know, they're talking about all the Trump campaign offices, and I believe that was an accurate statement that those were all previous Minnesota GOP offices previous to Trump coming in and taking over. Is that not accurate? Or most
Not
of
all
them?
of them. I mean, some of them
Oh.
were, but not all of them. But no, I mean, I just think that too, this is also part of what motivates Minnesota voters, right? And I think that this is part of the motivating factor with Walz is that Republicans just feel that things are not accurately reported on. And I think that to the point with Walz, we are now seeing a very different picture of Tim Walz than we saw in 2022. And I think it has to count for something. And somebody just said politics, it'll never be a settled science, right? But media coverage, attacks, good stuff, earned media, whatever it may be, I do think that makes a difference in races, honestly.
I think the Republican Party is a little too online. I think like you're seeing a lot of stuff on Twitter, certainly with, certain goofballs and certain alleged townhall.com columnists, but I don't think this is bleeding out into the public. I don't think outside of Twitter, all this stuff is actually having any sort of effect. That's just my theory. Twitter's not real life. A lot of people say that. And I have that feeling too, because I don't see that amongst people that are not politically involved. I'm not seeing any of this wall stuff other than on Twitter and a couple other, Rumble.
Yeah, and I think the big question is just why was Kamala up 10 points before choosing Walz, and then it was 5, and then it was 4, and then it was 5, and then it was 3. I mean, she's steadily trending down. And you can argue with anything all that you want. And I think, like you said, it's settled science. Like nobody's ever going to be perfectly right on this, but she is trending down. And I find that really, really interesting.
I think to be fair, I think there's been the KST polls have been pretty consistent at where it's at. And then you flip to Rasmussen and that's a bit of a curveball. My particular take is I like to look at trend lines and the one pollster, and the pollster that's done the most has been Survey USA. And I think it's been around 5 points pretty consistently over the last few months. What I will ask you is this, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Becky. I think it's fair to say that since Biden dropped out of the race, in Minnesota, the race has gotten more competitive. Is that fair to say? You guys can chime in if you want to.
Yeah, 100%. That's fair to say.
It's gotten more competitive, yes.
It's gotten more competitive in which way? Since
Biden got out of the race, the race in the race for president, particularly Minnesota, it's gotten. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I would totally disagree with that. I've said this a couple times on your show. Previous to that happening, we were desperate for volunteers, anyone to help. We were getting like 15 signups a day, like statewide, right? Like we were getting people were not motivated. People were not fired up. Literally almost the day that switch happened, it has been an overflow of volunteers. People are suddenly woke up. I would say that worse for Republicans by a mile, personally.
I would say that you're agreeing with me then, but from a different perspective. My point would be is that the race there was more energy in the race. I guess what I'm saying. That's what I'm referring to.
I think there's more energy, but I also think there's a lot more Democrats in the state. And I think if they are fired up to get out there, I think that makes the race less competitive, if that makes sense.
I see your logic. I kind of framed it the wrong way, but I see your logic.
Yeah. Come on, Michael.
I'll work on my DFL talking points.
Thank you.
I do want to move on. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch the results come in from the legislature and see what we're up for. We already know that there's so much in play when it comes to who is going to be the presiding governor in 2025. Now we have to see what the makeup of the legislature is going to be. So after election, as we're heading into January, maybe we'll get you guys back on and chat a preview there. But it's going to be exciting, and we'll wait and see. But I want to chat about another really exciting race, one that has a dear place to my heart, Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District. So Angie Craig is the incumbent there. She has been serving, I would say, her district very well. She has been a decently moderate Republican or a Democrat. She kind of herself describes the district as 30% Democrat, 30% Republican, and 40% independent. It definitely has a far different makeup than any other congressional district in the state. Currently, the crystal ball says lean Democrat. Real Clear Politics says toss up. So I want to get into what you guys are hearing, and I'm going to let Anna take the swings first. How do we feel about 2nd Congressional District? We have had Joe Tayrab on before, so we had the privilege of speaking with him, but I want to hear what you think about how the race is going down there. We'll hit on some of the drama around the endorsement later, but just how things are going right now in the makeup between the two candidates.
I think that they're going much better than they've gone in a very long time. Joe is a phenomenal candidate. And again, when you look at the whole political scene, right, all these little factors make a difference. He is an incredibly hard worker. He is out at events all the time. He is meeting with people all the time. He's, a former federal prosecutor. So he's kind of that, he's just like a go-getter, right? Like those types of people in those positions, they're just go-getters. So Joe's working his tail off. He's doing a phenomenal job raising money. The National Republican Congressional Committee is investing a lot. I mean, more than they have in recent cycles. So just from those things alone, I think it's going very, very well. The polling as well. I mean, I'll point back to the Star Tribune poll. It was super interesting when asking voters what issues are important. Immigration, the economy. Who do you trust to handle those issues? Trump or Harris? Trump, time and time again. Even the question of, who do you think is better to fix our democracy or better protect democracy? It's Donald Trump. And Joe is endorsed by Trump. And I know I said it earlier, but I do believe that turnout with Trump at the top of the ticket will help. So I'm actually very, very excited about TRAB and that race.
Well, what do you think about your gal, Angie Craig?
I mean, I think Angie's doing a great job. I think her campaign operation is easily the best I've ever seen. I think they're really smart and very effective at what they do. Also, I think, the local CD2 Republicans haven't even endorsed Joe. I mean, I'm sorry, I had to bring it up, obviously. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he doesn't really live there. We know he has his condo in Minnetonka, and he's rented some tiny little apartment in Burnsville. I don't understand where the motivation, where are the people who are fired up? I mean, maybe not you guys, but I watch Action for Liberty's podcast. They are actively going out there and slogging on him every single day. And I think they have enough of a following that I just don't see. I don't think this is going to be more competitive than Angie's was in 22 or 20. That's my take on it, but you never know. I think Angie just does what she does. She's a machine, truly in every way. And she keeps doing what she's doing. And I think she has a lot of respect from her peers in DC. And actually one time I was on a plane and I was going to talk to her, but her and Pete Stauber were engaged in such jovial convo that I didn't interrupt. Like, I think she gets along with folks well and people respect her. And I think Republicans in the district who don't like Joe, are probably going to lean that way as well. And there's a handful of them for sure.
I think you gave a lot of accolades to Action for Liberty crew. I believe you're going to have a new quote that they're going to preview on all of their material of being a bipartisan podcast now. But there certainly is something to whether it's them or just the endorsement process itself. Now, I worked for Jason Lewis's, ran his re-election campaign in 2018, was not successful, but their CD2 delegates and activists are a completely different beast. There's all sides of them. And I think that this is something, Will, I'm sure you've seen within your party in some different districts, that there are some that have different values and views of what they lift up. And Michael and I have talked a lot about the endorsement process and how sometimes how it can go when you focus more on the endorsement process itself than the candidates and what they represent. And so I personally do think that Joe is a great candidate, but I do think that Angie has done a really good job for the district. And I do think she has, as she spoke at the Democrat convention, right? She said, "I know I piss you guys off a lot," which I think is her acknowledging that she knows that she takes a lot of votes that Democrats on a national scale probably don't understand, but her district does. And so this is a district that has been a top 10 tier, or, top 10 race to watch for years and years and years. And there's a lot of money being spent on both sides. I've seen, I live up in Fridley, I'm outside of the district, but we certainly get some of the ads, and there have been a lot of ads from both sides. And I do want to say, my perspective is you very often don't go negative unless you have a need to go negative. I believe that there's some reason, and probably in polling, that she wants to take a swing at Joe. And I think obviously abortion is a topic that we've talked about a lot, and it makes sense that she's done it. However, I do have to say she, I think, was forced to pull one of her ads and rerun it because KSTP Truth Test did give her a D for her comments on or the campaign's language and phrasing of how they were portraying Joe Tayrab's view on abortion. So Anna, I want to give you an opportunity to take a swing if you want with that. No, Michael, you want to go first?
No, let Anna go, but just I'm here too.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, they did. I mean, she lied in the ad. And I think when you look at the abortion issue, especially, again, back to the Star Tribune poll, it was really interesting to see how people think about abortion, and they want the states to handle it. That is not Angie Craig's view at all. And I think that she lied about Tyler Kistner's position on abortion. I think she's lying about Joe Tayrab's position on abortion. And again, I think, like you said, Will, Twitter's not real life, right? Like, you actually have to get out and talk to people in the district, go to the fire musters, go to the parades, go to the pancake breakfasts, go to the VFWs, go talk to the Knights of Columbus, go to churches, go to synagogues, go to mosques, like, talk to people because, again, CD2 is not a crazy liberal district. It's just not. It never has been. I don't think it ever will be. And Angie might take a few votes here and there, but she is through and through a Democrat. And I just don't think that the independents are buying it anymore. And I would point to the polling yet again.
Michael, I missed over you in my initial round robin there. All you, man.
Here's what I want to say. I want to say to Republicans, I want to say to the leadership of the 2nd District Republicans, you're morons. How you screw things up. You screw things up consistently. And I believe that Becky, we have spoke about this in the past. We have spoke about how and I've spoken about how, independent of how I'm going to vote, I'd like campaigns have the opportunity, I spoke about it on Saturday, to be the marketplace of ideas where you can have good discussions. Do you want to know why Democrats have nice things in this state? Is because they operate in a smart way. And if you're a Republican in the 2nd Congressional District and you've made things difficult for Joe Tayrab, David Hann, or Anna Mathews, you are part of the problem. You are absolutely part of the problem. And Anna's not telling me to say that, but I'm going to say it because it's absolutely true. There are Republicans.
I do want to say too, though, Michael, the Republican Party is not the only party that has differences of opinion, right? Like the DFL's convention this spring, they had their own people protesting their convention.
I understand that.
But again, though, I don't think it's fair to classify the Republican Party as like, oh, there's this huge, hubbubaloo, blah, blah, blah. It's a big mess. We'll never get over this. It's the first time ever that a candidate has not been liked by 100% of the people in his party.
But
right?
my point is that there has been some issues down with the leadership of the second district GOP in this area that have created some challenges, I think, for Republicans to succeed. And those need to be put aside. Republicans have to start working in more of a collaborative way. And this is a congressional district where I think there's been some missed opportunities. And I think it's going to be a very close election. We'll see what happens on election day.
I do want to note one thing, which is the ballot meddling that's been done by the Democrats in the district. I think we'd be remiss to not talk about that, that they recruited this constitutional conservative to shove on the ballot, which they've been doing in other states. And I don't think that's good at all. I think that gives a lot of people the ick. So again, why would Angie Craig do that if she wasn't worried about it? Why would she be lying if she wasn't worried about it? I think that when you look at people in City 2 and they see this type of stuff, they just get the ick. And it's like, why? If she were really so great and she were so bipartisan and she were representing the district well, don't lie and don't recruit fake people to put on the ballot. It's not that I don't think it's rocket science to start putting those things together.
Will, are you part of the Action for Liberty podcast? How does that work? Because I've never seen.
I'm a listener.
You're on a podcast with the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. It's pretty interesting for you to be pumping up the juice of another podcast out there. But go ahead,
shouting out other shows.
That's an interesting strategy.
Look, I do opposition research. I listen to a lot of podcasts, Michael. I will say this. As far as that case is concerned, there's a lot of finger pointing and innuendo and assertions, but there's no facts. What I can say for sure are the last two previous cycles, hot party candidates have been run that factually was proven to have been recruited by Republicans, because I helped factually prove that. And that happened all across the state. Paul Gazelka himself was pointed at. One of your officials at the Minnesota GOP through the campaign was guilty of that. We know for a fact that it happened, and it happened the last 2 cycles. So, I think that it's pretty hypocritical to have finger pointing on something that there is no facts, no evidence of, other than assumptions and assertions. So,
well, I just think that it really reflects poorly on Angie Craig when we have people contacting us saying, how did my name get on this nominating petition that I never signed for this Thomas Bowman guy? I mean, what am I supposed to tell them? And that's why the Star Tribune has a majority of people polling saying that they don't trust our democracy, and they think that Donald Trump is the best person to fix it, right? Like, we have a problem here. And I believe that Angie Craig's actions have negatively played into that. And frankly, I want better. I live in the 2nd district. I want better than that from my representative. I think it's really gross, and I think it's really disappointing.
I just want to say 2 things. One, I think I'm completely with you. I'm with both of you here. I hate any time when anybody thinks that they're messing and getting a new candidate on the ballot. I mean, we should all want to have the best person in office that is elected by the majority or plurality of folks in their district, and having any sort of nefarious actions that detract from that. I think both parties are above it. We're all above it. I have to say that Angie Craig obviously herself was not involved in this. And so we each have roles to do here. And I'm proud of both of you for doing this. We talked about having a segment called the Spin Room, and I love good Anna doing your job and Will doing your job. You're both doing knockout jobs on this, but I'll just leave that at that. I think it's going to be a really close race. I think it's always going to be a really close race. I think there's a lot of money that comes into this race, in particular from the left. And so Joe Tayrab, both against with money and the infrastructure that the Democrats have, I think is an uphill battle. I think him keeping it close or even coming on top is a feat. And I think he is a really great candidate that I am pleased to see on the ticket. So we're going to move on from CD2. And with the remainder of our time, I want to spend some time chatting about the debate that is tonight. Now, we did talk about this a little bit last week, but we have 2 new guests with 2 new perspectives. So I'm interested to get your takes on this. First, just to recap, it is tonight at 8 p.m. Central. It is hosted by CBS in New York, 90 minutes long. Nora O'Donnell from CBS Evening News and Margaret Brennan from Face the Nation. And this week, unlike our episode last week, we have some more information about the rules and how the format of the debate is going to go. So there are going to be 2 4-minute commercial breaks during the 90-minute debate. No campaign staff is going to be able to interact with their candidates, very similar to the presidential campaign. No live audience, no opening statements. Candidates will not be able to bring pre-written notes or props onto stage. They'll have 2 minutes to answer, 2 minutes to respond, 1-minute rebuttals, and at the moderator's discretion, may get an extra minute if they want. The mics will not be muted, but CBS does reserve the rights to turn off mics if needed, which gotta love that, right? No topics or questions were shared prior to the debate. But one thing I want to start, I'm going to hold this. Nope, I'm going to start with it. One thing, we've talked a lot in our conversations about the previous debates about CNN not fact checking, ABC doing live fact checking. CBS is going to be having a QR code available on the screen during the debate, which is going to lead to their live blog, where they'll be doing live fact checking. The moderators are not going to be participating in any fact checking while on air. Michael, I want to start with you because I think this is fascinating. And I know we've talked a little bit about going back and forth about what the role of the moderator is, when they're doing too much on what side, and what mess it can get them into, like it did the last debate. Do you like this QR code? Do you not?
I think the QR code is ridiculous. I don't think it will have. I don't think anyone is going. I mean, we can barely get people to pay attention. No one's going to go get an app and download this. I think the best way to do this is for there to be some reasonable fact checking, balanced, reasonable fact checking during a debate. And that comes from both the candidates responding to the other candidates and other moderators trying to rein in the conversations. That's the most reasonable way. I think there's around 2 people that are going to download a QR code and follow the live checking. And I just think it's, and there's 2 of them are probably here. There's probably 3 of them that I'd probably do it just to see it, but I think it's ridiculous.
Will, what do you think? Do you think that there is a place? Do you think this QR code is going to be great? Or what are your thoughts on the general in-person as we go fact checking?
I think to have it as the only means of fact checking is a little odd. I think it would be good in addition to, like you said, reasonable, fair fact checking on both sides. But I can tell you, my dad once thanked me for reminding him what Googled is, google.com, because he was trying to look something up. So ain't no way he's figuring out a QR code. You know what I mean? That's just definitely not going to happen, for example. But I do think it's an interesting idea. I'm going to check it out. I had no idea. And I think it's, some value there, but I don't know how is that effective for reaching a wider audience? I don't really know. I kind of like live fact checking, but it's pretty interesting. I don't know.
We're in a post-COVID world. Menus are on our QR codes. I think more people than not do understand how to use them. But Anna, I want to get your perspective. After the last presidential debate between Kamala and Trump, we had Preya on as our Republican representative, and her and I maybe agreed a little bit on the fact that the fact checking did seem a little one-sided, right? There seemed to be a little bit more fact checking. Now, was there reasonings when there's comments about eating animals? Maybe, but what is your take? Do you think there's a place for the live as we go, or do you think something of this perspective, this way of doing things is a better way to do it?
Well, I have to give them credit for responding to a complaint, right? If people are saying again and again, hey, I don't like that this isn't, or, I just don't feel that fair information is being shared. I mean, I have to give them some credit for for actually listening and then taking action to respond to that. I think either nobody's going to use it, like Michael said, or everybody's going to use it. And it's just going to become this deluge of unprocessable information. I do think the bigger issue, though, is that when you look at debates, and the 4 of us will never fix this, and this isn't even a partisan thing, but only the really big networks get the debates, right? And I do think that there is a desire for more personable debates almost. I think it'd be fun to have a right-wing journalist and a left-wing journalist together, and then have the 2 candidates and let them throw opposing questions. Tim Walz, you let Minneapolis burn down.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say to that? Vance, your candidate said eating dogs and cats. What do you have to say to that? Let them throw the questions. And then at least I think you'd have some balance there, right? But when you only have the one interviewer, essentially, I know you'll have different people, but the one network, I think that's part of what causes some of it as well. And again, I am not going to pretend to know everything about what it takes to put on a nationwide debate, or I've never worked in it. I mean, I don't know, but I have to give them some credit for responding to that and just trying it. Again, what's insanity doing the same thing and expecting a different result? Hey, if they try this and it fails, they know that, hey, we tried it and it failed and we're not going to do it again. So we'll see. I don't know.
Totally agree.
I want to get your guys' take on how you think the 2 will perform. We'll start with you. What can we expect to see from Tim Walz, and what do you expect to see from JD Vance?
Well, one thing I can say for Tim Walz, I think JD Vance is going to be very reminded very often about his past stances on Donald Trump. I think we've all seen those quotes. He went on for years and years. He built his persona on being an anti-Trumper. And then he completely, once he decided he wanted to get close access to power, he decided to completely flip on that and become the ultimate Trump butt kisser. So I really think that is going to be shoveled in his face a whole bunch. At least I would hope so. And I think Tim Walz is a good debater as well. I think he has a sharp grasp of the facts. Sometimes he gets a little overexcited. I can relate to that a little bit. And maybe he flubs a line or something of that nature. But I really think he's a very good debater. And I think this will be a good setup for him. I think it'll be a good format. As far as JD Vance, I'll be honest with you, I've never seen him debate before. I don't really know. I know he went to he went to Harvard or whatever. I forget. He's an Ivy Leaguer. So he'll probably try to bust some of that stuff out. I've always wanted to use that actually against a Republican, but I think, yeah, I don't really know what to expect. I think, he's going to throw in the usual lines, the same stuff that Trump does. But I think this is going to be like a big unknown for me. I felt like going into Harris Trump, I kind of knew what to expect. This one, I feel like I'm super in the dark on.
But I think that's almost a good thing, though, that you're a little bit in the dark, because I know, at least from what I've been seeing, people are actually really excited for this debate because, again, we've been watching Trump debate since 2016. Harris is a known commodity. She's even before she was the VP. So I think people are actually intrigued, and I think that people really respect Vance and Walz in that they have kind of stayed out of some of the fray. You know what I mean? Like, they are a little bit less known. So I think that'll actually be good. Like, it will be interesting, like actually interesting. Like, let's see what happens tonight.
Totally agree. And they're also stylistically very different as well.
Yes.
So it's interesting to see how that will play on camera. Very interesting the way, because Vance seems like he's a little more stoic. He tried, he's a little more intellectual. Tim Walz obviously speaks from the heart. He's a very passionate guy. He gestures a lot. So it's going to be very interesting to watch and the differences between them.
We did hear in an interview that Walz did a while back that he kind of setting expectations a little bit, did mention, listen, I'm just a coach and a teacher, and Vance is a Ivy League, lawyer, right? Anna, what's your take of what we can expect to see from Vance, from Walz? Do you agree that it's going to be a little bit more of personality versus intellect, or what are you hoping for?
Well, I think, both Vance and Walz have significantly less personality than Trump and Harris, right? Like, they are both I don't want to call them like the anchor, but they're kind of the grounding effect on the ticket, right? Which is what I think the VP is supposed to do. I think one of the main reasons that Vance was picked is because he is very, very good with the media. He knows how to talk about what he wants to talk about. He knows how to remain calm. Just watching him answer questions, I think that he does a good job of turning things back to where they should be going. And so I'm excited to watch him do that tonight. I do think that he tends to be pretty calm and cool. Walz, the one thing that I think is going to be the wild card tonight, the dirty little secret, is that Tim Walz has a temper, and that has gotten him before, and he does not always stay calm and cool and collected. And I know that he has the coach persona and the teacher persona and the dad and the husband, and they're trying to say that Minnesota is this cute little neighborly paradise where, the DFL has been able to do so much in this purple region. He has a temper, and I think that he is provocable. And so I don't know what will happen with that tonight, but I'm kind of just expecting to hear more of, again, we in Minnesota have heard a lot from Tim Walz, so I don't think I'm going to be shocked by anything he says tonight. But that's just me.
Michael, any change of perception from our conversation last week? Do you think who do you think is going to be doing more of the poking? We saw obviously Harris try to provoke Trump a lot. We know that that's possibly a reverse tonight of Vance trying to get a rise out of Walz. Who do you think is going to be the leader in that?
I think that Walz is. I think the expectation is totally on Vance to perform tonight. I think that that's the expectation. And let me just say a few things to that. I'll repeat a little bit what I said last week. If JD Vance is so smart, he wouldn't be in the situation he's in right now. Polling has consistently showed that he's disliked in a head-to-head against Walz. That more voters are resonating and agreeing, and the likability factor is more with Walz than it is with JD Vance. It's because JD Vance has spent his entire time since he's been the VP talking about crazy conspiracy theories. And so the Yale graduate that's supposed to be so sophisticated and smart has not done a very good job of staying on message. I think the challenge is also going to be for him coming in as someone who has said the type of things that he has said about former President Trump. He called America's Hitler. And I think that's tough to do. I really struggle intellectually as someone who was never a Trump supporter, but someone who never said that type of hyperbolic stuff about the former president. I'm really challenged about how someone can mentally go from calling someone America's Hitler to being their running mate. I think that's going to be a challenge tonight for him to kind of stay cool, explain how he got there credibly, not how he can do that in a spin room, but how he can credibly stand in front of Americans and say, this is the guy I called America's Hitler, and now I'm standing with him. And I think that's going to be a challenge. I think Walz has the right type of enthusiasm. He gets energetic about the things that people want him to be energetic about. He's not getting angry because dogs and cats are being eaten in Springfield, Ohio. He's mad that people are talking and lying about dogs and cats being eaten in Springfield, Ohio. And so I think that Walz's enthusiasm and energy is going to come across in the right way. And I think JD Vance is the one that needs to land it tonight. And if he doesn't, I think the campaign's will continue to be in trouble.
If I could
add
just,
one other, go ahead, Will.
I just wanted to say, I know what you're referencing when you're talking about, we've seen him get angry, fired up during debates and stuff. I will say this. One conversation with Scott Jensen, I would be angry too. I would have blown my lid. Just talking to that guy would have absolutely driven me up the wall. I can't even speak right now because of the thought of Scott Jensen. I think on a national stage, I would expect him to kind of not. I don't think Vance is going to be able to trigger him and trigger that sort of emotion. So,
well, I do think the one big difference between Vance and Walz is that Walz has a record. Like, he has been given a shot to run a state. Like, he has done things. He has taken Minnesota in certain directions. And I do think that he's going to have to answer for those things, right? I mean, again, George Floyd, that was something that happened here that had national consequences. High handling of COVID, handling of the surplus. I mean, all of these things, he's going to have to answer for those. And so there are certain things in his record, and it will be on him to answer for those. So it'll be interesting.
COVID and the George Floyd incident all happened under Donald Trump too. That's all my one pushback, but I understand what you mean.
Right, but again, he had responsibility. I mean, he was elected to govern Minnesota, and voters get to decide if they're happy on how he's done with that.
Didn't they do that in 22? This is the one part of the conversation I never quite like. That never connects to me is 22 kind of should have been that, right? And I understand
Minnesota voters took a vote in 22. But again, though, Minnesota is not the rest of the country. Minnesota is not Pennsylvania or Ohio or Michigan or Texas or Florida or California or New York. So yes, 100%. And like I said, too, when you have additional media coverage, when you actually have Tim Walz on a national stage being exposed in a certain way, probably earning some more credit, probably having credit withdrawn from him, I think that it really paints him in a different light. And so, yes, Minnesota voters took a vote in 22, but now the country will be taking a vote on him in less than 40 days.
Before we move on, I want to ask a question I posed to our panelists last week. If Vance performs poorly tonight, do you think that Trump could change his mind about another debate? Will?
About another debate?
Yeah. Like, do you think he would agree to one with Harris in October?
I think it's possible. I think, the campaign may want to do some, patchwork on the last time they were seen publicly with the other candidate. I think it's possible. It's getting really late in the game. Like Anna just mentioned, less than 40 days. There's not a whole lot of time to get another debate together. It's crazy to think about too, by the way. And so I think it's possible, but I don't know. I think Trump will not want a butt kicking, if that were to happen, to be the last taste that voters see, probably. So I don't know, maybe, possibly.
Anna, what do you think?
Well, I think, honestly, regardless of how it goes tonight, things can always change. Like, I don't bank on anything. I mean, just because somebody says we're not doing another debate on either side, they could very easily put together another debate. I know it's a lot of work, but again, this is the major news network's jobs. They could put one together. So I don't know, maybe not. I think we'll just kind of have to see, right?
Michael, anything to round out debate prep or debate preview here?
The only thing I'll keep going back to is and I'm prepared to be wrong about this. I still think that there's a possibility of a debate. There's a part of me that believes that it will happen. And a part of the reason I think that is because I think Trump will want to do something. I think you get close to a race, you get close to an election cycle, and you start to get a sense that as you get closer, I could see there being a possibility of a last minute debate, just because of campaigns and candidates like to get some energy and they want to do something. And with that being still an option on the table, I think it could come together quickly. So I'd watch for that.
Yeah, well, and it just depends on the conditions too, right? Like, who's hosting the debate? Maybe they pull together something that hasn't been pitched. If they're polling and people want another debate, if something new comes out about Vance or Harris or Trump, I mean, again, 40 days, I know it doesn't seem like a long time, but it's actually a very long time. Like there's a lot that can happen.
Well, the breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky would be happy to host a debate, and we would ensure that there'd be multiple guests. Even though I've made a decision in this race, we would ensure that it'd be handled with full transparency and impartiality.
Get your fact check QR code together, then, Michael.
Yes,
Yeah, baby.
absolutely, we would do it. Go ahead, Becky.
Well, I do want to move on to my least favorite topic of the day.
Oh, this is great.
Football.
This is great.
So,
well, go ahead.
Well, I'm going to start with doing a little breakdown of the breakdown here. There is a gentleman called Woke Lib Will in first place. I wonder who that could be. Will Davis.
Michael named me. Michael named me. Yep.
I love it. Michael is in fourth place. Anna is tied for fifth, and Becky is down tied for ninth. That is
Wait,
brutal.
I'm beating you, Becky? What?
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
And so
I will say that Michael and I did tie this week. This week, week 4, we did tie. So I got to give myself a little pat on the back.
a couple points I'd like to make. Number one, Becky, what's my objective every season? Just to beat you. So my only goal is to make sure I finish ahead of Becky. And if I win the league, like I did last year, that's even better. But my objective is to just beat Becky. So this is great. And it's nice to have 4 guests that are participating in this. Yes. Will, you are currently on top. It's fantastic.
That's right. I never win these either. I'm terrible.
Recount,
exactly. Yes.
Stop the count.
I can still win if Mike Pence has the courage to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So yes. So no, that's good. So, and then what we do have, just very quickly, not to bring this into each other's houses, but we had a Packers showdown this weekend. And we did my wife did a podcast episode. Becky's husband did a podcast episode with us. They're both Packers fans. And so tough weekend for them.
It was a tough weekend. I don't know if you enjoyed sitting with your spouse during that game. I took a nap during part of it because I needed a little break. It was tough sitting next to a Packers fan.
My wife was gone for part of it. So I had some neighbors over during part of it. It was great to watch. Vikings won, and I'm very confident that where they're going. They're going to London this weekend. I'm excited to not be there, but I'm just really happy that we're doing football again. Everyone's competitive in this league. Will's in first place, and I'm beating Becky.
It's true.
That's all that really matters.
True.
All is
8:30 start time for Vikings Jets. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone again, and let me just say in closing, and I'm going to say this again and repeat this. It's really, really important that people see this happening, Minnesotans and people all across the world, because this is worldwide. Anna, you and Will are both, and Anna and Will are both partisans from different perspectives, and they came on this show and they spoke to each other today and debated, and they're going to leave hopefully as friends. And that's the type of discussion. We need to see more of that type of stuff. We need to see professionals like doing that type of stuff. It's so important this election cycle. And I'm so appreciative of Anna and Will for coming on, and for Becky for helping create this space, because this is ultimately what needs to have happen. If we can do more of this, I think everything's going to be just fine. And so I just want to thank you all for your leadership and coming on and being willing to do this. And it's so important to see. And I just wanted to say thank you before we close. Okay.
Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Becky, for.
And Will, gotta say thank you to Will.
I'm hold on, thanking you too for paving the path and making this possible. And yes, thank you to Will for coming on. It's actually not that hard for Republicans and Democrats to be friends. You know, like if you're a reasonable person, I think it's funny when it's like, oh wow, they had a conversation. It's like, yeah, duh. Like it's not that difficult. So yes, thank you, Will, for coming on.
Likewise. I'm in 2 pick'em leagues, 2 Republican pick'em leagues. So it's not hard to get along with people and not fight like cats and dogs. So
when you're winning, it's not hard. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
You should saw Becky last year when she was losing. She was terrible. Just terrible. Well, and Becky, thank you. So I want to thank everyone for listening to this. Another episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or the platform where you listen. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be out again soon. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day and watching. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, guys.